Afternoon. Hope everyone's well. Had a good day in this tragic of a day. Horrible out there, isn't it? Anyway, freezing. So here we are. The Creakers, Chapter 5. What was hiding under that bed? Should we find out? The first Creaker. Have you ever been so scared that you couldn't move? So utterly terrified that you're just frozen, helplessly waiting for something nasty to come and get you in the night, praying for the sun to come up and make everything okay again? That's how Lucy was feeling. She was sitting on her bedroom floor, trembling with fear, wrapped in her dad's stinky rubbish-collecting coat, her sweat-soaked hair sticking to her forehead, and her heart beating like a drum in her chest, and she was completely unable to move. Paralysed with fear, she tried to say hello, but she barely even managed to say, let alone hello. So she just sat there, staring into the shadows beneath her bed where she'd seen those two dark eyes watching her. She couldn't tell for how long she stayed frozen. Minutes, hours. Time doesn't seem to exist when you're that scared. However long it was, after what felt like forever of staring into the darkness, somehow Lucy drifted off to sleep. Now I know what you're thinking. How can you fall asleep if you're that scared? Well, that's just the thing. You can't. Not unless a creaker's there. What's a creaker? Don't tell me you've never heard of a creaker. Well, it's the name of the book for a start. Haven't you been paying attention? Have you ever heard noises in your house when you're in bed at night? That is a creaker. Have you ever felt as though there's something else with you in your bedroom? That's a creaker. Have you ever found a sack of presents by the fireplace on Christmas Day? Wait, that's not a creaker. That's Santa. Have you ever managed to fall asleep when you were so scared it seemed impossible? That's definitely a creaker. It's one of their naughty little tricks. That's exactly what this creepy little creaker used on Lucy that night. She didn't notice anything at all, but from under the bed came a gust of hot air. It was the reeking breath of the creaker as he blew a clawful of something gold and crumbly into the bedroom, which silently drifted into her eyes, then settled there without Lucy suspecting a thing. 10 minutes later, she was fast to snooze, leaving the creaker to creep out of his hiding place. There she is, fallen asleep. You see the gold dust. Yeah. In his bedroom, on the other side of Clutter Avenue, Norman Quirk was in his favourite Transformers PJs, busy ironing. Creases, 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 he huffed as he ran the hot iron over his scout uniform for the 5th time that night. The trousers were already the hardest part, and without his dad there to help, he just couldn't get them as neatly pressed as he thought was acceptable for a young scout. I'm afraid that'll have to do, he sighed, shaking his tired head as he examined each trouser leg through his magnifying glass. He slid them onto a hanger, which he hung on the silver handle of his wardrobe door, ready for the morning. Norman froze. The noise came from behind him. Then he noticed, in the polished surface of the wardrobe door handle, 2 little black specks like beady eyes staring at him from under his bed. Hello? He whispered, terrified of what might be lurking behind him. There was no reply. He swallowed his fear, gripped the iron, and whipped round in a flash. But there was nothing, no beady black eyes, just shelves lined with his Transformer collection. He sighed in relief, his heart pounding. At least I've got you here for company, he said as he dropped some food into the fish tank of his 2 pet underwater snails. Norman used to have goldfish, but it ran away At least that's what Dad told him. He watched as what looked like two bogies wearing shells slowly slurped up the side of the tank, their oily black bodies leaving a trail on the inside of the glass. He yawned and reached into the cold water to patch each snail on its hard, slimy shell. "Good night, Optimus. Good night, Megatron," he said. Then he grabbed his torch from the table, switched off his bedroom light, and leapt into bed. Nice little Transformers reference there. He stayed up for a while reading. He read a page of Scout Monthly, learning the latest knot tying techniques. It was his favourite thing to read before bed, but as he turned to the next page, he suddenly felt as though a cloud of tiredness had fallen over him. He shook his head, rubbed his eyes, and began reading the first line when "Hello," Norman croaked, now feeling weak and floppy. He was sure he'd heard someone in his room, but sleep was just too tempting. His eyes closed automatically. His head fell back on his fluffy pillow, and he drifted into a strange dream about slimy black creatures with oily skin making creaking noises under his bed. Lucy skipped along the street in her baggy blue dungarees, dragging a black plastic sack behind her. "Dad, you forgot this one," she called over the sound of the rubbish truck starting up. "Oh, well done, Lucy Pops," Mr. Dugston said, cutting the engine and stepping out of his enormous vehicle. "Are you coming to work with me today?" He held out his hand as Lucy struggled to lift the heavy bag off the ground. What the jiggins have you got in there?" he said, giving her a hand. There they are. What's going on here? What do you think she's doing? Look at the page. Can you see around the edge? What do you think she's doing? "Just rubbish," Lucy said. "Just rubbish," Mr. Dugston echoed in disbelief. "Just rubbish, my Lucy Pops. It's far more than just rubbish. It's glorious, wonderful, stinking, rotten rubbish." He lifted Lucy and the bin bag, then spun them around. It's the wonderful, stinky stuff that puts food on our backs and clothes and on the table." Lucy laughed. "Do you mean clothes on your back and food on the table?" "Do I?" "Yeah, I suppose I do," he teased. "Right, throw it in then." He lifted Lucy up high so she could drop the bag of rubbish into the back of the truck. "Lovely throw, my Lucy Pops. Now, off you trot back to your mum, and I'll see if I can turn that big bag of rubbish into a nice pie for dinner." He popped Lucy back on the ground, pushed her fringe to one side, and kissed her forehead before she turned and ran to her mum, who was standing in the doorway. "Have a good day, Larry," Mrs. Dugston called. "Full of rotten goodness, as always, my dear," he said as he swung himself up onto his truck and slammed the door shut with a bang. Lucy woke up from her dream in a startled panic. "How did I fall asleep?" she asked herself and quickly looked around. There was an orange glow from her window as the first bit of sunlight poked through the curtains and began filling her room. The last thing she remembered was staring into the shadows beneath her bed, and the next moment she was awake. The next moment she was waking up. She blinked and felt something in the corner of her eye. She rubbed a tiny clump of sleep out. Lucy wasn't sure why, but now that the sun had come up, she wasn't as scared anymore. Funny how sunlight does that, isn't it? You can be scared stiff during the night, but as soon as it's daytime, you feel fine again. Like we all somehow know that strange things only happen at night. Lucy stood up, took off her dad's grubby coat, returned it to the hiding place, and opened the curtains, allowing the sunlight to fill the room to the brim. Then she lay flat on the bed and carefully lowered her head over the edge to get a good look underneath. There was a nice gap under her bed, big enough for Lucy to fit if she ever wanted to. Big enough for her to be able to see right to the other side. To her relief, there was nothing there, no scary little eyes staring back at her. just her creaky old floorboards gathering dust. She sighed a big fat sigh. Oh, I must have imagined it, she thought. Was it all in my head? She wondered. Must have been a nightmare, she hoped. A very realistic nightmare. But very soon, Lucy was going to find out that it wasn't all in her head. Before long, Lucy was going to see those little black eyes again, and next time the creaker would not be alone. Blimey. How are you doing? That was a bit intense, wasn't it? Eyes under the bed, creaks in the dark. Well, I wish I could tell you that it all gets better from here. But the rest of the book is full of pretty winged ponies galloping across rainbows, scattering jelly beans from their hooves as they fly. But I'm afraid it isn't. It only gets worse. A lot worse. What's worse than a creaker? You'll see. Chapter 6. And we'll stop there. My God! We never found out what creaker was then, did we? Or did we? They're a bit spooky, these creakers. Are we ever going to find out? Are we ever going to see a creaker? Who knows? Oh, it's getting a bit scary. Check under your beds tonight. Oh. Okay, right, I'm going to go. Goodbye. So long.